Deep in the snow-covered mountains of Vermont, where cell signals fade and civilization feels like a distant memory, fate was about to weave an extraordinary tale. James Cooper, a single father struggling to make ends meet, was gathering firewood when he found her, an injured woman stranded on a treacherous mountain trail as storm clouds gathered overhead. Without hesitation, he carried her down the mountain to his modest cabin, never knowing she was one of the world's wealthiest women. The next morning, the valley echoed with the thunder of approaching helicopters. As dozens of aircraft descended upon his small homestead, James realized his act of kindness was about to change everything. But could a simple woodsman and a billionaire heiress bridge the vast divide between their worlds? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn crept through frost-laced windows as James Cooper stood at his worn kitchen counter, methodically flipping pancakes on a cast-iron skillet that had belonged to his grandmother. The familiar aroma of coffee mingled with maple syrup, a small luxury he always managed to afford, despite their tight budget. His weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency, arranging the modest breakfast with care that spoke of years of morning rituals. The old family photo on the wall caught the early light, drawing his gaze as it did every morning. Sarah's smile beamed back at him, frozen in time 5 years ago, her arms wrapped around a younger Emily. The image was taken at this very cabin, back when laughter came easier and bills weren't quite so overwhelming. James adjusted his flannel shirt, pushing away the familiar ache that came with these quiet moments. "Dad, is that blueberry I smell?" Emily's voice carried down the narrow staircase, followed by the soft thud of sock-clad feet on wooden steps. At 12, she was already showing glimpses of her mother's grace, though her untamed brown curls were all Cooper. "Sure is, kiddo. Found them in the back of the freezer. Thought we could use a treat today." He didn't mention that he'd been saving them for a special occasion. The rejection letter from Emily's science program scholarship lay hidden beneath unpaid utility bills on his desk, and she deserved something to soften the blow he'd have to deliver later. Emily slid into her usual seat at the kitchen table, her science textbook already open beside her plate. "Mr. Harrison says our science fair projects need to include at least one environmental monitoring component." She looked up at him, hope bright in her eyes. "The sensor kit is only $120. James concentrated on serving the pancakes, buying time before he had to disappoint her again. "That's quite an investment, Em. Maybe we could think of something more." He searched for the right word. Creative? Like last year's solar oven made from cardboard and aluminum foil? Emily's voice carried a weight beyond her years. "I got a B-, Dad. B- doesn't get science scholarships." The truth of her words stung more than any winter wind. James set down her plate and pulled out the chair across from her, its legs scraping against the uneven floorboards. "Listen, sweetheart." A sharp crackle from the emergency radio on the counter interrupted him, drawing both their attention. Heavy storm system approaching Vermont's northern mountains. Expected accumulation of 8 to 12 inches. Residents advised to prepare for potential power outages and hazardous conditions. James glanced out the window at the stack of firewood. Too low for comfort with a storm coming. They'd need more to weather what was heading their way. His gaze drifted back to the bills on his desk, then to Emily's hopeful face above her textbook. "Tell you what," he said, reaching across to close her book gently. "Let me head up the mountain today. Get us stocked up on firewood. When I get back, we'll sit down and figure out your project together. Maybe I can pick up some odd jobs in town next week." Emily's face brightened, but James saw Sarah in the way she tempered her enthusiasm, trying to protect him from promises they both knew might be hard to keep. "Thanks, Dad." She cut into her pancakes, carefully spreading the blueberries to make them last longer. "Just be careful up there today. The weather lady said the storm's moving in fast." James stood, dropping a kiss on the top of her head. "Always am, kiddo. Always am." He moved to the sink, washing dishes with practiced efficiency while mentally calculating how many hours of daylight he had before the storm hit. The mountain was his backup plan, his sanctuary, and his burden all at once. Its aging trails provided firewood, wild berries in summer, and the occasional odd job guiding tourists. Every resource he could wring from its slopes meant one more bill he could pay, one more opportunity he could try to provide for Emily. The family photo watched over them as they finished breakfast. Sarah's smile, a reminder of promises made and a future that had slipped away too soon. But in the warm kitchen light, with Emily's textbook open and pancake syrup drawing sticky patterns on her plate, James found his daily measure of peace. They had each other, they had their mountain home, and for now, that would have to be enough. James paused at the base of the trail, kneeling to retie the laces of his worn hiking boots. The leather was cracked, but well oiled, the soles patched twice, but still trustworthy. Like everything else in his life, they weren't much to look at, but they got the job done. He'd bought them 15 years ago, back when Sarah was still alive, and they dreamed of turning their small cabin into a mountain retreat for tourists. The October wind whispered through bare branches overhead, carrying the first bitter hints of winter. James shouldered his empty pack and gripped the handle of his axe, its familiar weight an extension of his arm after so many years. The mountain had been his provider and confidant since Sarah's passing, offering both solitude and sustenance. When the world below became too heavy to bear, "Keep an eye on the sky," he muttered to himself, a habit born from countless solo trips. The storm front was moving faster than predicted, dark clouds gathering above the distant peaks like wool, being pulled over steel. He had maybe 3 hours before the weather turned ugly, 4 if luck was with him. The trails switched back and forth across the mountainside, each turn as familiar to him as the lines on his palms. James moved with the efficient pace of someone who knew every root and loose stone, his boots finding secure purchase even on treacherous sections. Different seasons of his life were marked along this path. There was the lightning-struck oak where he'd proposed to Sarah, the rocky outcrop where he'd first taught Emily to identify bird calls, the hidden grove where he sometimes stopped to talk to his wife's memory. Today, he passed these landmarks with barely a glance, focused on reaching the stands of dry wood he'd spotted last week. The temperature was dropping steadily, and the wind carried the first scattered snowflakes. They melted against his weathered jacket, but he knew their kind, scouts for the army of winter bearing down on the mountain. A sound caught his attention, perhaps a branch breaking under the weight of early ice or something larger moving through the underbrush. James paused, years of mountain experience making him instinctively wary. Bears should be settling into hibernation by now, but hunger could keep them foraging longer than usual. He was about to move on when he noticed the tracks. In a patch of early morning frost, they weren't the familiar prints of local wildlife or the heavy boots of other woodsmen. These were different, narrower, with a distinctive pattern he'd never seen on these trails before. Tourist boots, maybe, though it was well past the season. "For hikers! Hello?" he called out, voice carrying across the slope. The wind answered with another flurry of snowflakes. The tracks led off the main trail, following a dangerous route toward the upper ridges. James frowned, studying the direction. Nobody who knew these mountains would take that path with a storm approaching. The ridge was exposed, with treacherous drops hidden by thick brush. Even in good weather it was a foolish route. He glanced at his watch, then at the darkening sky. The sensible choice was clear. Follow his original plan, gather the wood they needed, and get back to Emily before the storm hit. The ridge wasn't his problem. Probably just some traces from earlier in the week, before the weather turned. But Sarah's voice whispered in his memory, "The mountain provides for those who respect it and protects through those who know it." It was one of her favorite sayings, part of her belief that their cabin's location was no accident, that they were meant to be guardians of this small piece of wilderness. James adjusted his pack, boots crunching in the fresh dusting of snow as he turned toward the ridge. "Just a quick check," he promised the empty air. 10 minutes to make sure nobody's up there." The path grew steeper, his boots searching for purchase on increasingly icy rocks. Wind cut through his layers now, carrying the metallic taste of approaching snow. The tracks continued, growing fresher. Whoever made them had passed this way recently within the last hour or two. Then he heard it, distinct this time, carrying under the wind's howl. A cry for help, barely audible but unmistakably human. James broke into a careful run, boots gripping the treacherous ground as he rounded the ridge's shoulder. The sight that greeted him stopped him cold, 30 feet ahead, half hidden by scraggly brush. A woman lay crumpled against an outcropping of rock. Her clothes were expensive, but completely unsuited for the mountain. No wonder she'd fallen. Even from this distance, he could see she was conscious but in pain. One leg bent at an awkward angle beneath her. The first heavy snowflakes began to fall as their eyes met across the distance. In that moment, with the storm building and the mountain growing more dangerous by the minute, James couldn't know that this encounter would change not just his life, but Emily's future and the fate of the mountain itself. All he knew was that someone needed help, and on this mountain, that was all that mattered. James approached carefully, mindful of the treacherous ground that had already claimed one victim. The woman watched him with a mixture of relief and wariness, her composure remarkable, despite what must have been considerable pain. Snow was starting to dust her dark hair, and her pale fingers pressed against the rock face as if it were the only solid thing in her world. "I'm James Cooper," he said, keeping his voice steady and calm. "I live down the mountain. Are you hurt badly?" "Catherine," she replied, her accent suggesting expensive schools and boardrooms rather than mountain trails. "And yes, I believe my leg is broken." She spoke with the controlled precision of someone used to managing crisis, though the slight tremor in her voice betrayed her fear. As James knelt beside her, his eye caught the glint of something expensive on her wrist, a designer watch, its face cracked from the fall. The brand alone probably cost more than his truck. She noticed his glance and self-consciously tugged her sleeve over it. "Can you tell me what happened?" he asked, already assessing the best way to move her. The snow was falling faster now, the wind driving it nearly horizontal. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I needed some time to think." The trail looked manageable from below. A flash of frustration crossed her face. "Clearly, I was wrong." James nodded, not pressing for more. Everyone came to the mountain with their secrets, some to find them, others to lose them. Right now, the only relevant fact was getting her to safety before the storm trapped them both. "I'm going to check your leg," he said, setting down his pack. "Then we need to move. This storm's going to be bad, and we're too exposed up here." Catherine nodded, biting her lip as he gently examined her injury. The break seemed clean, but her ankle was already swelling inside her impractical hiking shoe, the kind sold more for fashion than function. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and her clothes, while obviously expensive, offered little protection against mountain weather. "How far?" she asked, her composure cracking slightly as another gust of wind buffeted them. "My cabin's about 2 miles down," James replied, shrugging off his jacket. "Here, put this on. Your clothes aren't made for this weather." She started to protest, but another icy blast changed her mind. As he helped her into his jacket, she winced, and something fell from her pocket, a small leather wallet. It landed open, and James caught a glimpse of what looked like diplomatic credentials before Catherine quickly retrieved it, her movements sharp despite her injury. "Ms. Catherine," he said carefully, "I don't need to know who you are or why you're here, but I do need to know if anyone's going to be looking for you. This storm's going to ground any rescue helicopters, and the trail will be impassable by nightfall." She met his gaze, something shifting in her expression, perhaps recognition of the simple truth in his words. "No," she said finally, "no one knows I'm here. I was taking a few days off the grid, as they say." James nodded, already formulating a plan. "I'm going to have to carry you down. The trail's too dangerous for you to hop, even with support." He looked at her seriously. "It won't be comfortable, and I'll need to move fast before the storm gets worse. Think you can handle it?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Mr. Cooper, I've handled hostile takeovers and boardroom coups. I suspect I can manage a piggyback. Ride down a mountain." Something in her dry humor, so unexpected in their dire situation, made James smile despite himself. "Well then, Miss Catherine, let's get you out of here before Mother Nature launches her own hostile takeover." He helped her onto his back, trying to position her injured leg as comfortably as possible. She was lighter than he expected, but her presence fundamentally shifted his center of gravity. This would be a challenging descent, even without the approaching storm. As he took his first careful steps down the trail, Catherine's arms tightened around his shoulders. "Mr. Cooper," she said softly, her breath warm against his cold ear. "Thank you. Whatever happens, please know that I'm grateful." James adjusted his grip and kept moving, letting his boots find the sure path through increasingly treacherous terrain. "Thank me when we're down," he replied, focusing on each step. "And call me James. Anyone riding piggyback on my mountain gets to use my first name." Behind them, the ridge disappeared into swirling snow, and ahead, the storm painted the familiar trail into something wild and new. Neither of them could have guessed that this desperate descent would lead them both exactly where they needed to be. The old walking staff had been a project during those first lonely months after Sarah's death, whittled from sturdy oak during long evening hours when sleep refused to come. Now it proved invaluable, helping James probe the snow-slick ground ahead as he carried Catherine down the darkening mountain. Each step required careful consideration. One slip could send them both tumbling down the treacherous slope. "How are you holding up?" he asked, voice raised against the wind's growing howl. The storm was intensifying faster than he'd anticipated, thick snowflakes cutting visibility to mere yards ahead. "I'm fine," Catherine answered, but he felt her shiver against his back. "Though I'm beginning to appreciate why mountain rescue teams train for years." James adjusted his grip, using the staff to steady them as they negotiated a particularly steep section. "Most rescue teams don't have to deal with fashion boots and broken designer watches," he said, trying to keep her engaged and distracted. "From the pain, touché." Her laugh was barely a breath against his ear. "I suppose I wasn't exactly prepared for this particular board meeting." A strong gust nearly knocked them sideways. James drove the staff deep into the ground, anchoring them until the wind passed. Catherine's arms tightened around his shoulders, her composure slipping for just a moment. He felt her heart racing against his back. "Tell me about the mountain," she said suddenly. "You seem to know every inch of it." Inch. James carefully picked their path around a snow-covered boulder, buying time to consider his response. "It's been home for 15 years. My wife Sarah and I bought the cabin when we were young and stupid enough to think we could turn it into a tourist lodge." The memory brought a smile despite their situation. "Turned out we loved the solitude more than the business plan. And now it's just me and my daughter Emily. She's 12, probably wondering why I'm not back with firewood. Yet." He felt Catherine tense slightly at the mention of Emily. Though he couldn't guess why, they passed the lightning-struck oak, its bare branches collecting snow like a white skeleton against the grey sky. Under different circumstances, James might have found it beautiful. Right now, he was too focused on the increasingly treacherous descent, each step requiring complete concentration. "Your daughter," Catherine said after a while, her voice thoughtful. "She lives up here with you, year-round?" "She's stronger than she looks. Like her mother." James paused to catch his breath, leaning on the staff. "There's a good school in the valley, and the mountain teaches things you can't learn in classrooms." Catherine was quiet for a moment, processing this. When she spoke again, her voice carried a different weight. "What does she want to be when she grows up?" "Environmental scientist. She's brilliant with it, too. Has this whole project planned for the science fair, monitoring mountain weather." Patterns and their effects on local ecosystems. He didn't mention the equipment they couldn't afford, or the scholarship rejection letter hidden in his desk. That's quite sophisticated for a 12-year-old. James smiled, proud despite their dire situation. That's Emily, always reaching higher than anyone expects. He shifted Catherine's weight carefully, trying to give her injured leg more support. Speaking of reaching higher, we're about to hit the steepest part of the descent. Need you to hold on tight. The next section of trail was barely visible through the swirling snow, but James knew it by heart. He planted the staff firmly with each step, using it to test the ground before committing their weight. Catherine remained silent, but he could sense her studying their surroundings with keen attention, as if memorizing every detail. Halfway down the steep section, James heard the ominous crack of a branch breaking under heavy snow somewhere above them. His muscles tensed, instincts honed by years on the mountain's screaming danger. "Hold on," he warned, just as the first small avalanche of snow and debris came sliding down the slope toward them. In one fluid motion, he swung them behind a large boulder, using the staff to brace against the rock face as loose snow cascaded past. Catherine's breath caught, but she didn't make a sound. When the danger passed, he felt her slowly release her death grip on his shoulders. "Well," she said, her attempt at lightness not quite hiding the tremor in her voice, "I suppose that's one way to avoid a budget meeting." James couldn't help but chuckle as he checked that their path was clear. "Miss Catherine, I have a feeling you're the type who never avoids meetings. You just find more interesting ways to hold them." Her answering laugh carried a warmth that seemed to push back against the storm's chill. For a moment, suspended between danger and safety, something shifted in the space between them, something neither was ready to name, but both felt with unexpected clarity. The cabin's warm lights pierced the gathering storm like a lighthouse beacon. James felt Catherine stir against his back as they emerged from the tree line, her first glimpse of his humble home, drawing a soft exhale. The structure wasn't much, weathered, logs and a tin roof that needed patching, but right now it represented salvation from the mountain's fury. "Dad?" Emily's voice carried from the front porch, followed by the screen door's familiar creak. "Dad, is that—" She stopped short, eyes widening at the sight of the stranger on her father's back. "Emily, get Grandpa's medical kit," James called, out careful to keep his voice calm and steady. "Our guest had an accident on the ridge." Catherine watched as the girl disappeared inside without hesitation, efficiency replacing surprise. "She's very composed," she murmured, and James detected something like approval in her tone. "Had to grow up fast," he replied simply, managing the porch steps with careful deliberation. The cabin's interior welcomed them with warmth and the lingering scent of morning's pancakes. James eased Catherine onto their worn couch, just as Emily returned, carrying an old leather medical bag that had seen 3 generations of mountain emergencies. "I put fresh water on to boil," Emily reported, handling the bag to her father with practiced familiarity, "and I found the ace bandages you restocked last month." James opened the medical kit, its brass clasps worn smooth by decades of anxious hands. Inside, modern supplies nestled alongside his grandfather's original instruments, a physical timeline of their family's history on the mountain. "Thank you, sweetheart. Can you get our guests some tea?" "The chamomile with honey." Catherine watched their quiet choreography with increasing interest. "You seem very prepared for emergencies," she observed as James carefully examined her injured leg. "Mountain teaches you to be ready," he replied, gentle fingers probing the swelling. "Emily, would you get the cold compress already on it?" His daughter moved through their small kitchen with quiet confidence, returning with a bag of frozen peas wrapped in a clean dish towel. Catherine accepted the compress with a grateful smile. "You must be quite the helper for your father," she said, and James noticed how she spoke to Emily as a person, not down to her as a child. "Someone has to keep him organized," Emily replied with a hint of her mother's dry humor. She studied their guest with undisguised curiosity. "Were you hiking alone?" "Dad says that's dangerous," especially with storms coming. Emily, James warned. Softly, but Catherine shook her head. No, she's absolutely right. She met Emily's direct gaze with equal frankness. I made several poor decisions today. Fortunately, your father was there to correct my mistakes. Something in her honest admission seemed to satisfy Emily. Well, you're lucky he found you. Dad knows every trail on this mountain. She paused, then added with practical concern, though now we won't have firewood for the storm. I'll go back out once I've got Miss Catherine settled, James said, wrapping the injured leg with practiced care. The break didn't feel compound, but she'd need a proper medical examination once the weather cleared. Don't be ridiculous, James. Catherine's voice carried an authority that made both Coopers look up. That storm's getting worse by the minute. You can't risk going back out. As if emphasizing her point, wind rattled the cabin's windows, driving snow against the glass in white sheets. Emily moved to stoke the fire, adding another precious log to their dwindling supply. We'll manage, James said firmly, securing the bandage. Emily, would you get the guest blankets from upstairs, and maybe one of your mother's old sweaters? Their guest's eyes tracked Emily's departure up the narrow stairs, then returned to James. I'm imposing terribly, she said softly, and now I'm taking resources you can't spare. James busied himself returning supplies to his grandfather's medical kit, its worn leather holding generations of similar moments. Strangers turned neighbors, emergencies turned friendships. Mountain provides, he said finally, sometimes in unexpected ways. A crack of thunder shook the cabin, making them all jump. Emily hurried back downstairs with an armful of blankets and a faded blue sweater that made James's heart twist with recognition. Storms right overhead, his daughter reported, her attempt at professional calm betrayed by a slight tremor in her voice. Then I suppose we're all stuck with each other, Catherine said, accepting the sweater with careful hands. She smiled at Emily, warm and genuine. Perhaps you could tell me more about that science project while your father makes us all some tea? James watched his daughter's face light up, saw how Catherine's interest seemed to fill some empty space. In their small home, outside, the storm raged against their windows, but inside something new and unexpected was taking root, as natural as spring following winter. The storm transformed their modest living room into an island of warmth and flickering shadows. Emily sat cross-legged on the floor, her science textbook open before her, while Catherine leaned forward on the couch, her injured leg propped carefully on a cushion. James tended the fire, each precious log added with careful consideration, so the sensors would measure temperature variations across different elevations. Catherine asked, studying Emily's hand-drawn project diagrams. That's quite sophisticated. And wind patterns, Emily added eagerly. Mr. Harrison says understanding microclimates is crucial for predicting how climate change will affect mountain ecosystems. She turned a page in her worn textbook, revealing margins filled with neat annotations. See? Like how these upper slopes might respond differently than the valley. James watched the interaction from his position by the fireplace, noting how Catherine paid genuine attention to every detail Emily shared. There was no condescension in her questions, no adult pretense of interest. She engaged with his daughters, ideas as if they were having a professional consultation. Have you considered adding precipitation measurements to your data set? Catherine asked, reaching for her tea with her good leg still immobilized. It could provide valuable correlation points. The full sensor kit includes a rain gauge, Emily said, then caught herself glancing guiltily at her father. But we're going to find creative alternatives. Catherine's eyes met James's over Emily's head, something unspoken passing between them. Before either could speak, a particularly violent gust rattled the windows, making them all jump. Maybe we should check the weather report, Emily suggested, reaching for the emergency radio. Static filled the room, broken by fragments of the forecast. Heaviest October storm in decades. Remain indoors. Power outages reported across. Sounds like we'll be keeping each other company for a while. Catherine observed, adjusting Sarah's old sweater around her shoulders. "Perhaps you could tell me more about your mountain. I admit I'm curious about people who choose this life." James added another log to the fire, buying time to consider his response. "It's not for everyone," he said finally. "Winters are hard. Summers are short, and the mountain demands respect year-round." "But it's beautiful," Emily interjected, closing her textbook. "Dad, tell her about the spring wildflowers and the elk that come down to the meadow when the snow melts." "You make it sound magical," Catherine said softly. "It is, in its way." James settled into his chair, memories washing over him. "Sarah, Emily's mother, used to say the mountain has its own heartbeat. You either learn to live with its rhythms or you leave. And you chose to stay, even after—" Catherine left the question unfinished, but her tone carried genuine curiosity rather than pity. "The mountain was home," he said simply. "It gave Emily and me something solid to hold on to when everything else—" He trailed off, surprised by his own openness with this stranger. Thunder crashed overhead, and Emily unconsciously moved closer to the fire, to them. Catherine reached out, her manicured fingers gentle on the girl's shoulder. "Thank you for sharing. You're home with me tonight," she said. "Both of you. I know I'm imposing on your supplies. Dad says the mountain provides," Emily replied with 12-year-old certainty. "Even if it's not always what we expect." James caught Catherine's slight smile at his daughter's words, saw something soft and almost wistful cross her face. For a moment, the sophisticated businesswoman fell away, revealing someone who perhaps understood more about unexpected provisions than they knew. "Your daughter is very wise, James," she said, her voice carrying a weight he couldn't quite interpret. "You've given her something precious here, despite, or perhaps because of, the challenges." The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney, and in that moment the storm outside felt more like a cocoon than a threat. Emily opened her textbook, again pointing out another diagram to Catherine, their heads bent together in the warm light. James watched them, struck by how natural it felt, this temporary family formed by circumstance and storm. None of them could have guessed that this night, with its borrowed sweaters and shared tea and quiet conversations, would become a turning point in all their lives, that sometimes the mountain's greatest gifts came disguised as misfortune, wrapped in storm clouds and chance encounters. Dawn broke over the mountain in shades of pristine white, the storm having painted their world into something new and clean. James stood at the kitchen window, coffee in hand, watching the sun spark diamonds off fresh snow. Behind him, Emily slept curled in her favorite armchair, while Catherine dozed fitfully on the couch, her injured leg propped where he'd last checked it during the night. The sudden, distinctive thrum of approaching helicopters shattered the morning peace. Catherine's eyes snapped open, resignation and something like regret crossing her face. "They found me," she said quietly, careful not to wake Emily. "I had hoped for a little more time." Before James could respond, the sound multiplied. Not one helicopter, but several, their synchronized approach echoing off the mountain walls. He moved to the window, coffee forgotten in his hand. 5 sleek black helicopters were descending toward the clear space near his cabin, their downdraft, sending snow swirling in elegant spirals. "Catherine," he said slowly, turning back to her. "Who exactly are you?" She met his gaze steadily, but before she could answer, Emily stirred and sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Dad, what's that noise?" Her gaze fell on the old magazine that had slipped from beneath her science textbook during the night, and her eyes went wide. "Oh my God!" James picked up the magazine. There, on its glossy cover, was Catherine, elegant in a business suit, standing before a gleaming corporate headquarters. The headline read, "Catherine Morrison, the billion-dollar mountain queen takes environmental innovation to new heights." The Morrison Foundation. Emily breathed, suddenly fully awake. "You're Catherine Morrison. You funded the new environmental research center at my school." She turned to her father. "Dad, she's like one of the most powerful women in sustainable technology." Catherine watched them both, her composed mask slipping just enough to reveal genuine concern about their reaction. "I needed some time away," she said softly. "The board was pushing for decisions I wasn't ready to make. So I came to the mountains to think." A rueful smile touched her lips. "Though I admit, breaking my leg wasn't part of the plan." The helicopters landed in a precise formation, and figures in dark suits began emerging. James watched as his humble clearing filled with what had to be private security personnel, their movements practiced and efficient. "Ms. Morrison," a sharp voice cut through the morning air. "Thank God you're safe." A man in an impeccable suit was striding toward the cabin, his relief at finding her warring, with obvious disapproval of her unauthorized adventure. "That would be Marcus, my chief of security," Catherine said, with a slight eye roll. "He's probably aged 10 years since I disappeared." She started to rise, wincing as she put weight on her injured leg. James moved instinctively to help her, but one of the security team was already there, professional concern radiating from every pore. "Ms. Morrison, we have a medical team standing by." "Thank you, David," she said, her tone shifting subtly to something more formal, more befitting her station. But when she looked at James and Emily, that warmth from last night returned. "I don't know how to thank you both." Emily clutched her science textbook to her chest, looking suddenly young and uncertain as their intimate circle was invaded by the trappings of Catherine's real world. Will we see you again?" Something flickered in Catherine's eyes. A decision being made. "Marcus," she called to her security chief, who hurried over. "Please have the helicopter wait. I need a moment with my hosts." Her tone made it clear this wasn't a request. As the security team retreated to a respectful distance, Catherine turned back to them. "James, Emily, what you did for me, taking me in, sharing your home and supplies without question or expectation, it reminded me of something I'd forgotten in all the board meetings and quarterly reports." She reached for her purse, which someone had retrieved from the mountain, and pulled out a business card. "I'd like to help with Emily's science project. The Morrison Foundation has a particular interest in supporting young environmental researchers." She smiled at Emily's widening eyes. "And perhaps we could discuss some ideas I have about sustainable development in this area. This mountain has shown me there are better ways to measure success than stock prices." James looked at the card, then at this remarkable woman who had stumbled into their lives. "The mountain provides," he said softly, echoing last night's words. "Yes," Catherine replied, her eyes holding his with an intensity that suggested she was measuring far more than mountain snow depths. "Yes, it does." The medical team had insisted on examining Catherine in one of the helicopters, leaving James and Emily standing in their suddenly crowded clearing. The morning sun caught the frost on the trees, creating halos around the incongruous sight of dark-suited security personnel moving efficiently through their familiar space. "Dad?" Emily's voice was quiet. "Is this real?" Before James could answer, Marcus approached them, his polished appearance somehow unmarred by the mountain environment. "Mr. Cooper, Ms. Morrison would like to speak with you both." He held out a leather portfolio. "She asked me to give you this first. Take your time reviewing it." Inside the portfolio was a single document, professionally printed on heavy paper, bearing the Morrison Foundation letterhead. James read it twice, his hands growing steadily less steady. Emily pressed against his side, trying to see. "Dad, what is it?" He cleared his throat. "It's a job offer." Catherine's security chief nodded. "Ms. Morrison rarely makes decisions without careful consideration, Mr. Cooper, even when those decisions come during unexpected mountain rescues." The document outlined a position that seemed crafted specifically for James, Mountain Conservation Director for a new Morrison Foundation initiative. The salary figure made him blink, but it was the additional notes that caught in his throat. A full educational scholarship for Emily, including the environmental science program she'd dreamed of, and a commitment to preserve their mountain home as part of a larger conservation area. "She's waiting to discuss the details," Marcus said quietly, and he hesitated, something almost human crossing his professional mask. If I may speak freely, I haven't seen her this certain about anything in years. The helicopter's medical bay was warm, smelling of antiseptic and leather. Catherine sat propped up, her leg properly splinted now, looking somehow both more and less imposing in the morning light. The business suit someone had brought her hung over a nearby chair, but she still wore Sarah's old sweater. "Before you say anything," she began as they entered, "I want to be clear. This isn't charity or impulse. I've been looking for someone to head our new conservation initiative for months. Someone who understands that mountains aren't just resources to be managed, but living systems to be protected." She smiled at Emily. "And someone who's raising the next generation of environmental scientists." James held up the contract. "This is overwhelming. Good ideas often are at first." Catherine's voice was gentle but firm. "James, do you know what most impressed me last night? Not just your knowledge of the mountain, but how you've taught Emily to love it, to understand it. That's exactly the perspective the Morrison Foundation needs." Emily could barely contain herself. "Does this mean we can get the sensor equipment for my project?" Catherine laughed, the sound warming the sterile space. "That's just the beginning. The Foundation is establishing a youth environmental research program. We need a pilot project to launch it." She raised an eyebrow at Emily. "Interested?" James watched his daughter's face light up with possibilities, even as his own practical nature raised concerns. "The salary alone is more than generous, but the additional provisions, Emily's education, protecting the mountain, are necessary components of a larger vision." Catherine's expression grew serious. "Last night, sitting in your cabin, watching you both, I realized I'd lost sight of something important. The Morrison Foundation was built on the idea that profit and conservation aren't enemies, but somewhere along the way, we got too focused on quarterly reports and stakeholder meetings." She shifted, wincing slightly at her injured leg. "Your mountain reminded me why I started this work, and you showed me what it looks like when someone truly understands a place, loves it, protects it." Her eyes met James's. "That's worth investing in." A knock at the door interrupted them. Another suit-clad figure entered with a tablet. "Ms. Morrison, the board is requesting an emergency video conference. They're concerned about recent events." Catherine's smile turned slightly wicked. "Are they now? Well, let's give them something real to be concerned about." She held out her hand for the tablet. "James, Emily, would you mind staying? I'd like to introduce the board to our new mountain conservation director and our pilot program researcher." James hesitated. "I haven't actually accepted yet." "Haven't you?" She glanced at Emily's shining face, then back to him. "The mountain provides, James. Sometimes it provides exactly what everyone needs all at once." Looking at the contract in his hands, James thought about Sarah, about her dreams for their daughter, about the countless nights he'd worried about Emily's future. He thought about the mountain, about protecting it for future generations, and he thought about the remarkable woman before him who had turned a dangerous accident into an opportunity for something extraordinary. "The board is waiting, Ms. Morrison," the aide prompted. Catherine raised an eyebrow at James, a challenge and an invitation in her expression. "Well, Mr. Cooper, ready to help me shake up some corporate expectations?" Emily slipped her hand into his, and James felt the future shift, bright with possibility. "I suppose," he said, smiling, "someone needs to teach your board members proper mountain protocol." The new house keys lay gleaming on the kitchen counter of their cabin, catching the late October sunlight. James stood before them, coffee cooling in his hand, while through the window he could see the construction crews carefully installing state-of-the-art weather monitoring equipment across the clearing. 2 weeks had passed since Catherine's helicopter departure, and their world was transforming with careful, measured steps. "Dad!" Emily burst through the door, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "The solar panels are up, and Mr. Rodriguez says we can start collecting data tomorrow." She dropped her backpack, now filled with the environmental monitoring equipment she'd once only dreamed of. "Oh, and Catherine's car just turned onto our road." James smiled at his daughter's casual use of their benefactor's first name. Catherine had insisted on it, though Emily still occasionally slipped into calling her Ms. Morrison during official Foundation video calls. The sound of tires on gravel announced Catherine's arrival. She'd refused to be helicoptered in for this visit, instead driving herself up the mountain road in a sensible SUV. Her leg, now healing well, had been cleared for careful walking. "I hope I'm not too early," she called out, making her way up the cabin steps with only a slight limp. She carried a folder of documents and what looked suspiciously like building plans. "You're just in time," Emily replied, already pulling out her new tablet to show Catherine the morning's atmospheric readings. "Look at these barometric pressure variations." Catherine settled at their kitchen table as if she'd been visiting for years, her designer clothes somehow not out of place among the cabin's rustic furnishings. "Fascinating pattern. Have you correlated it with the historical data yet?" James set a cup of coffee before her. She'd mentioned during their first night how much she missed simple coffee, untainted by boardroom politics, and settled into his own chair. "I thought this was supposed to be a housing consultation, not a science review." "Multitasking is my specialty," Catherine replied with a smile, but she did set aside the tablet to open her folder. "Besides, your daughter's research is already providing valuable insights for the Foundation's conservation models." She spread out the building plans, and James felt his breath catch. The drawings showed their cabin, but thoughtfully expanded. A new wing for Emily's research equipment, solar panels integrated seamlessly into the existing roofline, and modern amenities that would make winter storms more manageable, all while preserving the essential character of their mountain home. "You're not just giving us a new house in the valley," he said slowly, understanding dawning. Catherine's eyes met his, warm with appreciation for his insight. "You belong here, both of you. The mountain is part of who you are." She traced the plans with one elegant finger. "Besides, what kind of mountain conservation director would you be if you abandoned your mountain?" Emily leaned over the plans, her scientific focus momentarily forgotten. "We get to stay, really stay." With some upgrades, Catherine nodded. "The Foundation needs a proper research station up here, and you need a functional home. I see no reason why they can't be the same thing." James studied the plans more carefully, noting how each addition served both practical and professional purposes. "This is incredibly thoughtful." "I had a good teacher," Catherine replied softly. "Someone showed me recently that true strength isn't about imposing change, but about nurturing what already works." A comfortable silence fell, broken only by Emily's excited murmurs as she discovered each new feature in the plans. Outside, the construction crew worked with careful respect for the mountain environment, as insisted upon in James's first official act as conservation director. "The board's quarterly review is next week," Catherine said finally, her tone casual, but her eyes intent. "I'd like you both there. Emily can present her initial findings, and James—" She smiled. "Well, I think it's time the board saw what real environmental stewardship looks like." James fingered the new keys, feeling their weight. Not just metal, but responsibility, opportunity, and something else he wasn't quite ready to name. "You're really shaking things up, aren't you?" "We are," she corrected, her hand covering his for just a moment. "All of us." She turned to Emily with practiced smoothness. "Now, tell me more about those barometric readings. I have some ideas about expanding the monitoring network across the whole ridge." As Emily launched into an enthusiastic explanation, James watched them together. The powerful business leader and his brilliant daughter, both alight with shared purpose. The new keys caught the sunlight again, and he realized they represented not just change, but expansion. Their home was growing, not just in size but in heart, making room for new possibilities none of them had imagined that stormy night 2 weeks ago. The November sun cast long shadows across the newly tilled soil behind the cabin, where Catherine knelt in designer jeans that had long since surrendered to mountain dirt. She held up an antique hand trowel, examining its worn wooden handle with curious fingers. Sarah's, James explained, accepting the tool. She always said gardening was like making promises to the future. He ran his thumb over the smooth wood, worn by years of his wife's touch. These were her favorite tools. And now they're helping build Emily's research garden, Catherine observed softly. Sarah would have loved that. They worked in comfortable silence, preparing the plots where Emily would grow native species as part of her expanding environmental study. The construction crew had finished the cabin's renovations last week, but Catherine still found reasons to drive up the mountain most days, trading her corporate offices for hours of surprisingly satisfying manual labor. "Dad, Catherine!" Emily's voice carried from the new research wing. "The science fair judges just posted the results." They exchanged glances, Catherine's hands stilling on the garden rake. "Should we?" "Oh, yes," James smiled, offering her a hand up. "We definitely should." Inside, Emily practically vibrated with excitement as she pulled up the school website on her tablet. "First place," she announced, her voice a mix of triumph and disbelief. They said the mountain weather pattern analysis was graduate-level work and an impressive contribution to climate science. "Of course it was," Catherine said, not bothering to hide her pride. She had ditched her gardening gloves, but hadn't noticed the smudge of dirt on her cheek. James found himself fighting an urge to brush it away. "Your methodology was impeccable. The Morrison Foundation's Environmental Science Scholarship Committee will be very interested in this," she continued, watching Emily's eyes grow wider. "In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if several universities started paying attention to our young researcher here." James leaned against the doorframe, observing the scene. Catherine had soil on her expensive jeans and joy in her eyes, looking more alive than she had in any of her magazine covers. Emily was growing more confident by the day, her dreams expanding as rapidly as her research plots. And he was starting to see a future he hadn't dared imagine since Sarah's passing. "We should celebrate," Catherine declared. "I could have my chef—" "I'm making Sarah's vegetable stew," James interrupted gently. "It's tradition for big moments." Something softened in Catherine's expression. "Even better," she said, "though perhaps I could contribute dessert. There's a remarkable bakery in town." "The one by the post office," Emily piped up. "With the apple tarts?" Catherine's eyes met James's over their daughter's head, and when had he started thinking of these moments in terms of their daughter? "The very one," she said. "I'll be back in an hour." It wasn't really a question, not anymore. She had smoothly woven herself into the fabric of their lives, her corporate empire managed through video calls and emails, while she spent increasingly more time on their mountain. The media had noticed, of course. Last week's business section had run a profile. Morrison Foundation CEO trades boardroom for Billionaire, a new model of corporate environmental responsibility. "I'll start the stew," James said. "Emily can tell us more about her project while we eat." Later, as the sun set behind the peaks, they sat around the cabin's expanded kitchen table. Catherine had loosened her ponytail, looking relaxed and present, in a way that still surprised him. Emily was deep into explaining her plans for expanding the weather monitoring network, her hands moving animatedly above her half-eaten apple tart. "You know," Catherine said during a pause in Emily's presentation, "I have a board meeting in the city next week. Perhaps you both could come. There's a natural history museum Emily might enjoy," and she hesitated, uncharacteristically. "Uncertain. I'd like to show you my world as you've shown me yours." James felt the weight of the invitation, not just to visit the city, but to be publicly acknowledged as part of her life. Emily looked between them, suddenly quiet, aware that something significant was happening. "I think," he said carefully, watching Catherine's face, "that would be perfect." Outside, the garden tools rested against the cabin wall, Sarah's old trowel among them. Tomorrow, they would use them to plant Emily's research plots, literally putting down roots in this new life they were building together. Some tools, James reflected, watching Catherine's smile bloom, were meant to be passed down, meant to help grow new dreams in well-loved soil. The stack of newspapers on Catherine's desk told their story in bold headlines. Morrison CEO's Mountain Romance, Billionaire's Fairy Tale, From Rescue to Romance, Morrison Foundation Board Questions, CEO's Personal Investment in Conservation Project. The latest, from that morning's financial section, was perhaps the most pointed. Shareholders concerned. Has Catherine Morrison lost her edge? James set his coffee down beside the papers, watching Catherine pace her penthouse office with barely contained energy. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the city skyline, so different from their mountain horizon. The board's concerns are ridiculous, she said, her usual composed tone fraying slightly. Our environmental initiatives have never been more successful. Emily's research project alone has generated more useful data than our last 3 contracted studies combined. They're not really worried about the science, James said quietly. The morning sun caught the silver in his hair, and Catherine found herself pausing to study him. Even here, surrounded by corporate luxury, he carried the mountain's steady strength. With him, no, she admitted. They're worried about me, about us. She gestured to the headlines. The notorious Ice Queen of Morrison Enterprises, suddenly spending weeks at a mountain cabin, getting her hands dirty in research gardens, skipping shareholder dinners to attend middle school science fairs, having the audacity to fall in. Love with a mountain man? James added, his voice gentle but direct. Catherine's breath caught. It was the first time either of them had named this thing growing between them. Before she could respond, her office door opened, and Emily burst in, clutching her tablet. Have you seen the comments on the Foundation's latest environmental report? She asked, then stopped short, sensing the tension in the room. Her eyes fell on the newspapers. Oh, it's nothing to worry about, sweetheart, Catherine said automatically, then caught herself using the endearment. When had that started feeling? So natural. I'm not worried, Emily replied with the direct honesty of youth. But you both are, because people think Catherine's changing, becoming less focused on business. She looked between them. But they're wrong. She's not less anything. She's more. James moved to put a hand on his daughter's shoulder, but Emily wasn't finished. I've read all the company reports from the past 5 years. The Foundation's environmental impact metrics are up 40% since Catherine started working with us. The new conservation initiatives are generating positive press, and 3 major universities have requested partnerships based on our mountain research station model. Catherine stared at the girl who had somehow become so much more than just a scholarship recipient. You've been studying the company reports? Emily lifted her chin. Someone at the science fair said you were just playing conservation because of Dad. I wanted to prove them wrong. With data. That's my girl, James said softly, and Catherine heard the pride in his voice. A knock at the door interrupted them. Marcus entered, his expression carefully neutral. Ms. Morrison, the board has called an emergency session. They're concerned about the direction of the Foundation's recent investments. Catherine straightened, CEO mask sliding into place, but James stepped forward. We'll come with you. James, she started to protest, but he shook his head. Emily's right. The data supports everything you're doing, but maybe the board needs to see more than data. Maybe they need to see that strength can look different than they expect. Emily clutched her tablet. I have all the charts ready, and the university partnership proposals. Catherine looked at them both. The man who had carried her down a mountain, and the girl who had charted her company's rising success, and felt something shift inside her. The headlines caught her eye again, but now they seemed less threatening, more like a challenge to be met. Marcus, she said, decision made. Please inform the board that I'll be bringing our mountain conservation director and our lead youth researcher to the meeting. Her lips curved in a smile that would have been familiar to anyone who had ever seen her close a major deal. It's time they understood exactly what the Morrison Foundation's future looks like. As they rode the elevator down to the boardroom, Catherine felt James's hand find hers, while Emily reviewed her presentations one last time. The girl had somehow managed to inherit both James's quiet strength and Catherine's business instincts, creating something entirely new and wonderful. "Ready?" James asked softly. Catherine squeezed his hand, thinking of mountain storms and garden tools and second chances. "With you both?" "Always." The old cabin keys felt heavier in Catherine's hand than the sleek fob to her penthouse ever had. Standing on the cabin's porch in the crisp December air, she watched James unlock the door with the same set of keys he'd used that stormy night 2 months ago. So much had changed since then, yet this place remained steadfast, an anchor in the storm of public opinion and corporate politics. The board meeting had been intense. Emily's presentation of their environmental data had been flawless, but the shareholders' concerns ran deeper than numbers could address. "It's not about the foundation's success," one board member had said afterward. "It's about recognizing Catherine Morrison." She hadn't been sure whether he meant recognizing her authority or recognizing who she was becoming. "Penny, for your thoughts?" James's voice drew her back to the present as they stepped inside. The cabin welcomed them with familiar scents: pine, wood smoke, and something uniquely home. "Just thinking about definitions," she replied, running, her hand along the smooth wooden counter they'd installed during the renovation, old and new, merged with careful thought. "Like her life these days. Who I was. Who I'm becoming." Emily had already disappeared into her research wing, eager to check on her ongoing experiments. The sound of her excited voice carrying through the cabin as she recorded new observations brought a smile to Catherine's face. "Having second thoughts?" James asked quietly, stoking the fireplace to life. Catherine turned to study him. This man, who had literally carried her down a mountain and somehow carried her heart along with him. "About us?" "No." She moved to help him with the kindling, her designer boots long since traded for practical mountain wear. "About how to make them understand?" "Maybe." The fire caught, casting warming light through the cabin. Outside, the first snow of December was starting to fall, fat flakes drifting past windows that now held triple-pane glass, but still framed the same magnificent view. "They see it as a fairy tale," she continued, settling onto the couch they'd picked out together. "The billionaire and the mountain man. They're waiting for the spell to break, for me to come to my senses and return to being the Catherine Morrison." They knew. James sat beside her, close enough to share warmth. "And what does Catherine Morrison want?" The question hung in the air, simple but profound. Through the doorway, they could hear Emily explaining something about barometric pressure to her research log, her voice confident and happy. "I want this," Catherine said finally, gesturing to encompass the cabin, the mountain, their small family unit that had formed so naturally. "The Foundation's environmental work has never been more meaningful. We're making real change, not just talking about it in boardrooms." She turned to face him fully. "But more than that, I want evening fires and garden dirt under my nails and science fair presentations and you, both of you." James reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, with a gentleness that still surprised her. "You know, Sarah used to say something about the mountain, that it strips away everything unnecessary until you're left with what's real." "Smart woman," Catherine murmured. "She would have liked you," he said softly. "Your strength, your heart, the way you encourage Emily's dreams." Catherine felt tears threatening. She, who hadn't cried in a corporate boardroom in 20 years. "I'm not trying to replace her." "No," James agreed. "You're building something new, something that honors what was while creating what can be." He smiled. "Rather like what you did with the cabin." The parallel struck her, and Catherine found herself laughing softly. "Is that what I should tell the board? That I'm not demolishing the old Morrison Foundation, just renovating it, making room for growth while preserving its heart?" "Tell them whatever you want," James said, drawing her closer. "But know that you don't have to choose between worlds. You can be Catherine Morrison, corporate leader and environmental innovator, and also be Catherine who gets dirt under her nails and helps with science projects and falls asleep by mountain fires. Emily's voice drifted in again, now excitedly, calling out about some new data pattern she'd discovered. The snow fell thicker outside, promising to paint their world white by morning. Catherine fingered the old cabin keys in her pocket, thinking about locks and doors and the choices that open them. The board meets again next week, she said thoughtfully. I think it's time to show them something. Would you both come back to the city with me? James raised an eyebrow. Another presentation? No. Catherine smiled, a plan forming. Something better. I want to show them this, all of this. We'll host the meeting here. Let them see what real conservation looks like, what genuine corporate responsibility can be. Her smile widened. Let them try to call it a fairy tale when they're standing in the middle of it. James's laugh rumbled deep in his chest. Catherine Morrison, I do believe you're about to shake up the corporate world again. No, she corrected, leaning into him as the fire crackled and their daughter's voice carried through their shared home. We are. Catherine stood at the cabin's window, absently turning the ring on her finger, a Morrison family heirloom passed down through generations of business titans. Outside, a line of luxury SUVs wound up the mountain road, carrying board members who had never ventured beyond their Manhattan boardrooms. The morning sun caught the ring's sapphire, casting blue reflections that reminded her of the mountain sky. They're here, Emily announced, emerging from her research wing wearing her best sweater and an air of determined professionalism. The girl had spent hours preparing her presentation stations, each one showcasing different aspects of their environmental monitoring network. James appeared from the kitchen, carrying a tray of coffee service that managed to look both elegant and authentically mountain-appropriate. Ready? He asked Catherine softly. She touched the ring again, thinking of her grandfather, who had built Morrison Enterprises from nothing, of her father, who had expanded it globally, and of herself, the Ice Queen CEO, who had found her heart. On a mountainside. Yes, she said. Very ready. The board members entered in a rush of expensive coats and barely concealed skepticism. Catherine watched them take in the cabin's interior, the seamless blend of rustic charm and cutting edge. Research equipment, the wall of environmental data displays, the sweeping mountain views through triple-pane windows. Catherine, Marcus Reynolds, the head of the board, stepped forward. This is unexpected. His eyes caught on James and Emily, understanding dawning. Ah, your mountain family, my partners, Catherine corrected firmly. James Cooper, our Mountain Conservation Director, and Emily Cooper, head of our Youth Research Initiative. She gestured to the cabin around them. And this is the future of the Morrison Foundation. It's certainly rustic, another board member observed, attempting to hide her grimace as she sat on the custom-made couch. Actually, Emily stepped forward, tablet in hand, this facility represents the most advanced environmental monitoring station in the Northeast. Would you like to see our data collection network? Before anyone could respond, she launched into her presentation, leading the group through displays of weather patterns, ecosystem changes, and conservation metrics. Catherine watched the board members' expressions shift from polite attention to genuine interest as Emily's expertise became apparent. These readings, one of them interrupted, leaning closer to a screen, they show a 40% more accurate prediction rate than our contracted services. 47%, Emily corrected confidently, and that's just with our initial sensor network. Once we expand to the North Ridge. Expand? Marcus cut in, turning to Catherine. You're planning further investment in this experiment? Catherine felt James step closer, his quiet strength supporting her as she faced down her board. She touched her family ring once more, then squared her shoulders. The Morrison Foundation was built on innovation, she said, her voice carrying the authority that had made her one of the most powerful CEOs in the country. My grandfather didn't become successful by following old paths. He saw opportunities others missed. She gestured to the data displays. This is our opportunity. Not just environmental monitoring, but a whole new model of corporate responsibility. Through your personal connection, Marcus's tone made the question a challenge. Through understanding that real change requires both head and heart, Catherine replied. She reached for James's hand, no longer hiding what they meant to each other. Yes, I found something personal here, but I also found what the foundation had been missing, genuine connection to the environments we claim to protect. Emily stepped forward, still holding her tablet. Would you like to see the university partnership proposals? We have 7 major institutions requesting to replicate our research model. The board members exchanged glances. Catherine recognized the look. They were calculating profit margins and publicity potential, weighing risk against reward. Perhaps, she said quietly, but with steel in her voice, we should take a walk. Let me show you what we're really protecting here. As they filed out onto the winter-touched mountain trails, Catherine felt James squeeze her hand. She looked down at her. Family ring, thinking how its blue stone matched the December sky above their mountain home. You know, she whispered to him, my grandfather proposed to my grandmother on a piece of wild land everyone told him was worthless. He built our company's first headquarters there. James smiled, understanding. Are you saying business vision runs in the family? I'm saying, Catherine replied, watching Emily eagerly point out environmental features to increasingly engaged board members, that sometimes the best legacy we can honor is the courage to see value where others don't. She touched her ring one last time, and to fight for it. Ahead of them, Marcus had stopped to peer at one of Emily's monitoring stations, his earlier skepticism giving way to reluctant fascination. Catherine smiled, recognizing the look of a businessman beginning to see opportunity in unexpected places. Some battles, she knew, were won not with corporate tactics, but with truth too compelling to deny. The blueprints for the privacy fence lay across the cabin's kitchen table, nearly forgotten, as Catherine paced with her phone pressed to her ear. No, absolutely not. We're not doing a reality show. She paused, listening. I don't care how many millions they're offering. The Mountain Research Station isn't a tourist attraction. James looked up from where he was reviewing local building permits for the fence. Through the window, he could see the 3rd news van this week attempting to navigate the mountain road. Camera crew in tow. Their story had exploded across social media after the board meeting. The ruthless CEO transformed by mountain love. The Environmental Research Station revolutionizing corporate conservation. The 12-year-old scientist whose work was reshaping climate studies. They're at the end of the road again, Emily reported, checking the security cameras they'd reluctantly installed. She'd adapted to their new fame with remarkable poise, but lately had taken to doing her atmospheric readings before dawn to avoid the cameras. At least they're staying behind the property line this time. Catherine ended her call with a frustrated sigh. That was the 4th production company this week. Apparently, we're the feel-good story of the year. She settled into the chair, beside James, automatically reaching for his hand. I'm sorry about all this. I never meant to turn your peaceful mountain life into a media circus. Our mountain life, he corrected gently. And we'll figure it out. That's what these are for. He tapped the fence plans. Emily pulled up her latest research data on her tablet. Actually, I've been thinking, maybe we could use this attention, somehow, for the environmental work? Catherine's expression shifted from frustrated to intrigued. What do you have in mind? Well, everyone wants to tell our personal story, right? But what if we only gave interviews to publications that agree to focus equally on the research? One human interest paragraph for every scientific finding they publish? James watched Catherine's face light up with pride and recognition. It was the same expression she wore in board meetings when a particularly clever solution presented itself. That's brilliant, sweetheart. We control the narrative by making them work for it, And, Emily continued, warming to her theme, we could use the fence installation to test new wildlife corridor designs, turn it into a research project about balancing human privacy needs with animal migration patterns. Catherine was already reaching for her phone again, but this time with purpose rather than frustration. Marcus. Yes, I know what time it is. Listen, we need to call an emergency PR meeting. Emily's just solved our media problem and potentially created a new research initiative. She winked at Emily. Yes, that Emily, our youngest board advisor, has done it again. James raised an eyebrow. Board advisor? Oh, did I forget to mention? The board voted yesterday. They want Emily to serve as a youth advisor to the Foundation's Environmental Committee. Paid position with a full college scholarship attached. Catherine's casual tone didn't quite hide her satisfaction. Apparently, her presentation last month convinced them that youth perspectives are vital to our future planning. Emily's tablet slipped from her fingers. Really? But I'm 12. 13 next month, James reminded her, his throat tight with emotion. And more than ready for this. Catherine gathered up the fence plans, her business mind clearly already racing ahead. We'll need to coordinate the PR strategy with the construction timeline. Maybe we could invite selected press to document the wildlife corridor installation. Emily can explain the scientific principles involved, as long as they stay in designated areas and don't interfere with the actual research, Emily stipulated, sounding so much like Catherine in full CEO mode that James had to hide his smile. Of course, Catherine agreed. We're not giving them a show, we're giving them a lesson in responsible environmental journalism. She paused, looking at James. What do you think? Too much? Too fast? He thought about the quiet life they'd had before Catherine's arrival, about the peace of their mountain solitude. But he also thought about Emily's growing confidence, about the important work they were doing, about the joy of building something meaningful together. I think, he said carefully, that sometimes the best way to protect what matters isn't to hide it away, but to share it thoughtfully, to let its value speak for itself. Catherine's expression softened. Like a mountain that provides exactly what everyone needs? Exactly like that. Emily picked up her tablet again, already typing notes. I'll start designing the wildlife monitoring protocols for the fence project. And maybe I could do one interview for the science journal that asked last week. James and Catherine exchanged glances, seeing in their daughter's enthusiasm the perfect balance of past and future, of privacy and purpose, of family and ambition. Together, Catherine said softly. We'll do it together. The handmade scarf was Catherine's first attempt at knitting, a skill Emily had insisted on teaching her during their long winter evenings. Its stitches were uneven, some dropped, others pulled too tight, but James wore it proudly as they hiked up the familiar trail. 1 year had passed since he'd carried an injured stranger down this same path, and the mountain seemed determined to recreate the scene, complete with softly falling snow. Hard to believe it's been a year, Catherine mused, her hiking boots now well worn and practical. She moved with confidence on the snowy trail, though she still occasionally reached for James's hand on steeper sections. I was so focused on escaping the board that day, I didn't even check the weather report. Lucky for us, Emily called from ahead, where she was taking readings from one of her monitoring stations. The equipment gleamed against the winter landscape, a testament to how much had changed. Otherwise, Dad would never have found you. The mountain provides, James and Catherine said in unison, then laughed at their shared thought. They reached the ridge where they'd first met, now transformed by Emily's research equipment and the careful improvements they'd made to the trail. Catherine paused, looking out over the valley where their expanded conservation project was taking shape. I used to think I understood power, she said softly. Corner offices, board votes, market shares. But standing here again, she squeezed James's hand. This is real power, protecting this, preserving it for the future. Emily was setting up her tablet, coordinating data from multiple stations. At 13, she carried herself with the unique confidence of someone who knew their work mattered. The latest issue of Environmental Science Monthly lay rolled up in her pack. Her first peer-reviewed paper featured on its cover. "The storm's picking up," she reported, professional tone belied by her excited grin. "Just like last year. Want to see the comparison data?" "In a minute, sweetheart," Catherine replied, drawing closer to James. "First, I need to do something." She reached into her pack and pulled out a small wooden box. James recognized it. He'd seen it on her desk in the city, a family heirloom that usually held the Morrison corporate seal. "I've been carrying this up here for weeks," she admitted, "waiting for the right moment. The board suggested I do this at the annual shareholders meeting, make it a public statement about the merger of our worlds." She shook her head. "But that wouldn't be us, would it?" James felt his heart skip as she opened the box. Inside wasn't the corporate seal, but a simple gold ring set with a small piece of raw sapphire, the same blue as the winter sky above their mountain. "I had it made from my grandmother's ring," she explained. "The one I always wore in board meetings. But this felt more authentic." She took a deep breath. "James Cooper, I came up this mountain a year ago looking for escape, and instead I found home, found family, found love I never knew I was missing." Emily had stopped pretending to check her data, watching with shining eyes as Catherine continued. "I'm not asking to replace Sarah. She'll always be part of who you both are, part of what makes you the people I love so deeply. I'm asking to build something new with you, to keep growing this beautiful life we've started together." She held out the ring. "Will you marry me? Both of you, really. Because this is about our whole family." James looked at the ring, catching the winter light, at his daughter's joyful face, at this remarkable woman who had transformed their lives while somehow making them more authentically themselves. "The mountain provides," he said softly, drawing her close. "Is that a yes?" Catherine whispered against his chest. "That's a definitely yes," Emily answered for them both, abandoning her tablet to join their embrace. "But can we finish the atmospheric readings first? This storm's data is perfect for my next paper." They laughed, the sound carrying across the snowy ridge. Catherine slipped the ring onto James's finger, then pulled Emily's handmade scarf more securely around his neck. "Practical and romantic," she declared, "just like us." Together, they gathered Emily's readings as the snow fell gently around them. The storm was softer than the one a year ago, less desperate, more like a benediction. Below, their expanded cabin gleamed with warm lights, research equipment, and the promise of evening fires and family dinners. "Next time we come up here," Emily said thoughtfully, "we'll be collecting data as the Coopers-Morrison family. How's that for a scientific legacy?" Catherine smiled, remembering the corporate ice queen she'd been, the woman who had fought her way up this mountain in inappropriate shoes and a desperate need for escape. "I think," she said, watching James adjust Emily's monitoring equipment. "With careful hands, it's exactly what all of us were meant to be." The new business plan spread across the cabin's expanded dining table, its pages filled with Catherine's elegant handwriting and Emily's precise technical diagrams. Outside, spring was finally claiming the mountain, patches of green emerging from melting snow. James stood at the window, watching a team of researchers carefully install the latest weather monitoring equipment while a documentary crew filmed from the designated media area. "The Morrison Cooper Mountain Research Institute," Catherine read from the document's cover page, testing the words. "What do you think?" "I think," James replied, turning from the window, "that it's perfect, though Emily might argue for Cooper-Morrison instead." "Actually," their daughter called from her research wing, "I've been running analytics on both versions. Morrison Cooper has better sound recognition patterns in academic databases." She emerged with her latest dataset, now wearing the official research director badge that Catherine had insisted on having made. "Also, I might have already registered the domain name." Catherine laughed, making a note in the margins. "Of course you did. Speaking of which, how are the university applications coming along? At 13, Emily was already fielding early interest from top environmental science programs. The latest letter from MIT sat prominently on her desk, right next to the family, a photo from their winter engagement. "I'm still analyzing the options," Emily replied with careful diplomacy, "but I think I want to stay close to the mountain. Maybe design my own research track through the institute." James and Catherine exchanged glances. They discussed this possibility late into the night, weighing opportunities against roots, ambition against connection. "What if," Catherine said, slowly pulling out another document from her folder, "we could offer something even better?" She spread out a second set of plans, these focusing on educational programs. The institute could partner with universities for a new kind of environmental science education. Theory and practice, academics and real-world research, all centered here on the mountain. Emily's eyes widened as she scanned the proposal. "We'd be creating a whole new educational model? Why not?" Catherine's eyes sparkled with the same enthusiasm she once reserved for corporate takeovers. "We've already revolutionized corporate environmental research. The board's not just supportive now, they're enthusiastic. Our methods are being adopted across the industry. And the mountain provides," James added softly, watching his daughter and his fiancée dream together. "Though I'm not sure Sarah and I ever imagined quite this scale when we bought this cabin." Catherine reached for his hand, her engagement ring catching the spring light. "She gave you both strong roots here. Now you're helping those roots grow into something extraordinary." She turned back to the plans. The first phase of student residences could be ready by fall. Small scale, of course, carefully integrated into the environment. "We'll need to expand the wildlife corridors," Emily was already making notes on her tablet, "and design new monitoring systems for human impact studies." "Oh, we could make that the first student research project?" James moved to study the plans. More closely, his practiced eye evaluating the proposed additions. The institute buildings had been thoughtfully designed to nestle into the mountain landscape, as organic as the research stations that now dotted the slopes. Like their family, it was a perfect blend of progress and preservation. "There's something else," Catherine said, pulling out one final document. "The Morrison Foundation is establishing a trust. The entire mountain, plus the surrounding conservation area, will be permanently protected. No future board or CEO can ever develop it." Emily looked up sharply. "But what about the institute?" "We'll operate under strict environmental guidelines that you'll help design," Catherine smiled. "Consider it your first official project as junior trustee." "Junior trustee?" Emily's voice cracked with surprise. "Once you're 18, James clarified, having discussed this part of the plan with Catherine extensively. "Until then, you'll be an advisory member, helping shape the Institute's future." Emily sat heavily in her research chair, looking between them with shining eyes. This is really happening? We're really building all this? Together," Catherine confirmed, "as a family, as partners." She gathered the various documents into a neat pile. "I have the board meeting tomorrow to finalize everything. Would you both come? Emily can present her part of the educational proposal, and James," she smiled at him warmly, "well, the mountain conservation director should definitely weigh in on our expansion plans." James looked out at their mountain, at the careful balance they'd struck between progress and preservation, between corporate power and environmental stewardship, between past bonds and future growth. Somewhere, he felt sure Sarah would approve of how her beloved mountain had helped build this new kind of family, this new kind of legacy. "Of course we'll come," he said, drawing both his girls close. "After all, someone needs to remind the board about proper mountain protocol." Emily laughed, already pulling up presentation designs on her tablet. "Don't worry, I've prepared a whole section on sustainable corporate practices in mountain environments, with historical data comparisons and everything." Catherine's eyes met James's over their daughter's head. Ready to revolutionize environmental education, Mr. Cooper? With you two? He smiled, thinking of storm rescues and science projects and love found on snow-covered trails. Always. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and crisp, autumn painting the mountain in brilliant golds and reds. James stood in the cabin's living room, adjusting his tie while looking at the two framed photographs on the mantel. The first was old, Sarah, holding a toddler Emily, both laughing in the mountain sunshine. The second was new, taken just yesterday. The three of them at the Institute's opening ceremony, Emily proudly cutting the ribbon, while Catherine and James beamed beside her. "Dad," Emily's voice carried from upstairs. "Catherine needs help with her something borrowed." He climbed the stairs to find his fiancée sitting at Emily's desk, wearing a simple white dress that managed to look both elegant and perfectly suited to a mountain wedding. In her hands was Sarah's old garden trowel, its wooden handle smooth with years of use. "Emily thought," Catherine said softly, "we might incorporate it into the bouquet, if you think it's appropriate." James felt his throat tighten. At 14, their daughter had grown into someone who understood the delicate balance between honoring the past and embracing the future. "It's perfect," he managed. The ceremony would be small, held in the clearing where he'd first carried Catherine down. The mountain, now that space was transformed, not just by the discreet research equipment that Emily insisted remained active even during the wedding, but by rows of chairs for their intimate gathering of family, board members, and the students of their newly opened institute. The latest atmospheric readings suggest 0% chance of snow, Emily reported, checking her tablet while somehow simultaneously helping Catherine with her hair. "Unlike your first meeting," she grinned, "though I have all the equipment ready to document it if any unexpected weather patterns develop." "Our daughter, the scientist," Catherine laughed, but her eyes were proud. "Speaking of science," Emily continued, "MIT called again about the joint research program. They're excited about combining traditional university education with our hands-on Mountain Institute model. They're calling it the Morrison-Cooper method now." James watched Catherine's face soften. They'd all come so far from that stormy night. The corporate CEO who'd found her heart, the struggling single dad who'd found new love, and the young girl whose dreams had grown as vast as the mountain itself. The sound of arriving cars drifted up from below. Through the window, they could see Marcus directing the seating arrangements with the same efficiency he once used for board meetings. The documentary crew that had been following their story was setting up in their designated area, though today they'd agreed to film only the public portions of the ceremony. "Ready?" James asked softly. Catherine stood, taking his hand while reaching for Emily with the other. "You know, when I hiked up this mountain that day, running from corporate pressures and board expectations, I thought I was looking for escape. Instead," she squeezed their hands, "I found my way home." Emily picked up her tablet with her free hand. "The sensors are recording everything," she assured them. "Temperature, wind patterns, atmospheric pressure, the whole meteorological history of your wedding day." "For science?" Catherine asked, amused. "For memory," Emily replied, "and maybe a little for science." They descended the stairs together, passing the newly installed educational displays that lined the cabin's walls, each one telling part of their mountain's story. Outside, autumn sunlight played through the changing leaves, and the air held that particular crispness that James had always loved about mountain mornings. The photographer was waiting to capture their arrival, but James paused them just before they came into view of the gathering. "Look," he said softly, pointing to where a pair of eagles soared overhead, riding the thermal currents with effortless grace. "The mountain provides," they said together, and even Emily didn't check her tablet for data correlation. Later, after vows were exchanged and celebrations shared, after the last guest had departed and evening was softening the mountain's edges, they sat together on the cabin's expanded porch. Emily was already downloading the day's atmospheric readings, excitedly noting patterns for her next research paper. Catherine had traded her wedding dress for one of James's old flannel shirts, looking more content than she ever had in corporate suits. The photographer had left them with one final shot, the three of them framed against their mountain backdrop, the institute buildings blending naturally into the landscape behind them, their faces bright with joy and purpose. It would soon join. The others on the mantel, telling the next chapter of their story. Not just a fairy tale of rescue and romance, but a testament to how love, like nature itself, finds unexpected ways to grow, adapt, and thrive. So, Emily looked up from her tablet with a grin, ready to revolutionize environmental education as the Morrison Cooper family. James drew Catherine closer while reaching for his daughter's hand. Beyond them, their mountain stood eternal, keeper of their past and guardian of their future. Together, he said, always together.